From Sacramento State, this is Beyond J, taking conversations from campus to the world. I'm your host, Phillip Altstatt. On Sunday, Hollywood will celebrate the 97th Academy Awards, celebrating the year's best in film. Before the envelopes are opened and we find out who the Oscar goes to, we wanted to talk with Michele Foss-Snowden, a professor of rhetoric and media in the Department of Communication Studies here at Sac State. Her research looks at, among other topics, race, ethnicity, and gender in film, television, and other media. She's also the host of the podcast, The TV Doctor. We'll talk about this year's nominated films, overall trends in filmmaking and media, and her teaching here at Sac State. Dr. Foss-Snowden, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, before we get kicked off with all the stuff I want to talk about, tell us about your podcast.
Oh, okay. So the podcast is called The TV Doctor, and my tagline is, I'm not a doctor on TV, but I play one in real life.
Which I love.
I think you have to be of a certain age to kind of really get that joke. But so the basic idea behind the show is that I'm prescribing television that a person would need in order to get through whatever socio-emotional ailments they're dealing with. So if you say that your significant other is not really beloved by your family, then I might find a specific episode of a specific show and kind of prescribe that for you.
Yeah, that is fantastic.
Thank you.
Welcome to our podcast.
Yes, I love it.
I'm interested in hearing about your perspective on this year's Oscars and the nominees.
Yeah. So the one thing that the Oscars do very well is they give us things to talk about and to think about. And so this year is no different at all. It is different in that I feel like there's so much media to consume. So for someone to be able to kind of get all of it is a Herculean feat. So there are a lot of things that I've seen and I'm loving. There are a lot of things that I've seen and I'm like, uh-oh, here we go, buckle up, right? And then there are a lot of films that I still need to see before the big night. So I've got a busy week in front of me.
Oh, yeah. Is there anything so far that has surprised you about this year's nominees? Yeah.
So I'm definitely surprised by the idea of it being almost 10 years since Oscars So White.
Yeah.
It was an interesting moment for me. I was surprised at how many of the nominated pictures had films that were, or had content, had themes of inclusion and respect and understanding. I was also surprised by how many did not. But also not that surprised about that. I was surprised to see that Denzel Washington was in the race and didn't walk away with a nomination. I was surprised that Wicked didn't get more nominations than what it got. But
I mean, it's all anybody talked about for so long.
Right? Exactly. You couldn't turn on the TV without seeing somebody's commercial. Everything in the world was decked out in pink and green. So yeah, I was a little surprised about that.
Yeah. So you mentioned the, Oscars So White situation.
Yeah.
And one thing at the time that concerned me was that there might be some pandering going on. And so I was dig into that a little bit more.
Let's do it.
Can you give us any statistics on how things have changed since then?
So I'm not a statistician.
That's fine. That's fine.
That's all right. But here's what I can tell you is going on. So after the Oscars So White movement and the promises made by the Academy, made by Hollywood as an industry in general, I think the films that were being made and the films that were being recognized did appear kind of on the face of it all to be getting more inclusive. Okay. But the problem with that is that, like you said, the motivation behind that is questionable, and it comes to a point where we need to recognize that representation, right? We're looking for more kinds of people to be represented, to be counted.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not a statistician, but we are still celebrating the first this, the only that.
Yeah.
And what happens with those kind of reactions is that it's a distraction from what's really going on, right? So with Amelia Perez, for example, is an interesting moment of representation because we have the first openly trans actor who has been nominated for an acting award, right? But that nomination, which has got folks celebrating and saying, oh, isn't this great? The Academy is patting themselves on the back. Aren't we inclusive? Look at what a good job we're doing. Everyone's invited to our party. While we're celebrating that one only first, right? In 2025, we're still having firsts. While we're celebrating that, meanwhile, we are not asking the questions about the quality of that representation. So while it is progress, and that's true, and that's fantastic, it is also a portrayal. It is a representation that has a lot of issues. There's a lot of questions that we need to be asking about that particular example, right? So if we are all distracted by the idea of counting and getting everybody counted, then we're kind of missing the big part of the struggle.
Yeah. You know, I guess at some point I saw it similar to this, this therapy where they make you laugh, even just fake a laugh, but that will increase your serotonin levels, and then you will start really laughing, and it changes habits. It's like even if it is forced, even if there is just like this motivation that is not pure in intention, it maybe pushes things to the foreground in a way that can result in something positive.
Sure.
Right?
And I want to be clear. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be celebrating the representation, right? Representation is super important. My goal, though, and what I am an advocate for and an activist for, is taking it beyond that and making sure that those representations are as robust and responsible as possible.
Well, and also one thing that I wanted to touch on, because you mentioned the Amelia Perez. And what about there's this other side of it, right? Where the performance by Carla Sofia Gascon has received some pushback from the LGBTQ community and the Mexican community.
So one of the largest critiques of that performance is that maybe not necessarily the performance, but the film overall is that the way that they treat this character is being subject to some of the most tired and ancient and frankly dangerous tropes and stereotypes that surround this community, right? So I'm not sure how much I can spoil. Should we be like spoiler alert now?
I didn't consider that. Will you give us a spoiler alert?
Okay, so spoiler alert. Yeah. But so the title character transitions over the course of the film, and that transition is treated like a death, which is a very played trope, right? There are multiple instances throughout the film of dead naming, and there is, I'm like, how do I put this? The character does not live happily ever after. We'll just put it like that. And so the character doesn't have the opportunity to kind of live fully, and we don't get the benefit of a story. It's almost like the character is punished for being who she is, right? Yeah. So that I think the LGBTQIA plus community is absolutely right to be frustrated with this representation. as well as the Mexican and Mexican American community. There are nuances of the film that are not immediately apparent to me because I'm not a part of that community. But I trust them when they say something's not right here. I trust them. I know the film was made largely in France with a French cast, with a lot of folks who were French. And there were nuances that I'm sure were missed.
Yeah. Well, let's take a step back.
Sure.
And in general, like, what are you seeing in Hollywood trends, and maybe even the implications of the trends that you're seeing?
Sure. So one of the things that seems to me to be trending is that the blockbuster films are, well, and all of this is kind of a cycle anyway, right?
Yeah.
So Hollywood has a very well-established pattern of being like, we've never had so many small films nominated before. Sure you have.
Yeah.
Sure you have. But that's part of the Hollywood machine to make us feel like everything that's happening is new and fresh and exciting, right?
Yeah.
So this is not really a season of the blockbuster. A lot of the Best Picture nominees were films that were relatively difficult to find. Speaking about Emilia Perez, that's a Netflix film, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a trending, that's something that's trending as well. And that's really interesting to me, where it's not just the same, 4 studios that are looking to make these films. We're seeing the funding and the creation of Oscar-winning films or Oscar-nominated films that are coming from places that are unexpected. And I think that's probably going to continue.
Yeah. And, I'm glad for it.
I am too.
So, our listeners might be wondering why we're talking about film and your podcast and how we feel about the trends in Hollywood.
Sure.
How is this related to your research on campus?
So I teach classes that are, I guess the through line through all of the classes that I teach is the idea that we must pay attention to the mass messages that we're receiving, right? So I think a lot of folks are aware right now of how important it is to be able to interpret and hear clearly what the messages are that are being delivered to us, right?
Yeah.
It's media literacy for sure, but it's beyond that. It's kind of an individual ability to work through a message, especially a mass-mediated message, and understand things about how that message was created, what are the different building blocks, what is the meaning that's attached to each of those building blocks, and then how do you, as an audience member, receive that and use it to guide what you do in your life, right?
Yeah.
So all of my classes have that through line of, let's take this message, let's break it apart, let's look at the guts of this thing, and then let's talk about what each one of those things means, right? I'm talking about anatomy here, but it's like, when you're doing a dissection and it's like, okay, this is the heart. What does the heart mean? How does that work with the overall message? Why am I interested in the heart? That kind of thing. So that goes through all of the classes that I teach, whether it be in media or just rhetoric in general. It's about understanding meaning in messages. We here in Sacramento, and especially at Sacramento State, we are very fortunate, I think, to live in and work in a place where we are regularly interacting with people who are not like us, not to borrow from Kendrick.
We've done that before.
But that is I think in this case, a positive that we get to have those interactions. We're fortunate to have that, but also we are rare in that way. And there are a lot of people who live in parts of the world that are they don't have those opportunities for interaction. So they learn about themselves, and they learn how to interact with others based on these messages that they're receiving, based on the TV shows that they're watching, based on the films that they're seeing. And so if those messages are constructed in a way that teaches you things that are false or harmful or discriminatory about any kind of population of person, right? Any of the different ways that humans manifest, they don't have the opportunity to check that against actual experience and actual interactions, right? So I'm really doing my best to kind of encourage not only better analysis and interpretation and understanding of media messages, but also the creation of media messages that are coming from a more realistic and authentic place.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, is part of this that there's a danger in not understanding and maybe being manipulated by the media that you're ingesting? For sure. That is, of course, a danger, right? If people don't possess the skills of analysis, and then they're just going to take what anybody tells them, right? But I think the danger is on both sides, right? There is danger of me not knowing what I'm looking at. There is danger in you creating something with the knowledge that you know that people are going to take it at face value. Yeah.
And not think.
I mean, certainly I don't have the knowledge that you have on the topic, but it's something that has in recent years affected the way that I allow my children to consume the television screen.
Yeah.
When I realized that they process even the most gentle stories on a different level than I do. And that they need time. They need time to
conversation
to process that before you just go to the next episode or to the next show.
That's right. So I saw something online the other day that said that Gen X was raised on hose water and neglect. And as a proud Gen Xer, I can confirm that is true. But
drink so much hose water. Didn't think about that till now.
So like a lot of the people in my generation, I watched a lot of TV and film growing up. I was not neglected. Like my mom and dad were amazing. But one of the things that my mom encouraged in me very early was to not just treat what I was watching as just, let it wash over me sort of thing. She had me doing book reports on shows, right? So what did that mean? And why do you think that person said that? And what would you have done in this situation? So it was, I learned from a very early age to be critical of what I was consuming, those messages. And so I take the same approach with my 6-year-old daughter. It's mommy's job to watch TV and to watch films. And so she watches a lot of stuff with me. We watch a lot of Star Trek together, my daughter and I. And so every time we are talking about it, we're processing it. Like you said, we are thinking about what those messages mean, because the shame that would fall upon me if I sent out into the world someone who's less than being a critic. And critical and criticism is not a bad word, right? It's not negative to be critical. It just means that you're thinking deeply and systematically. That's all.
Yeah. Man, I could only, you brought up Star Trek, and I can only imagine there's so much fuel for your podcast.
The most recent season is all about Star Trek.
Okay.
Yeah. So listen, I grew up on Star
I've
Trek.
got homework to do.
Oh. Yeah. Well, and we were kind of casually talking earlier about shows that there's always an episode that can be used to kind of help you work through whatever of a different show, and Star Trek is one of those shows as well. There's always an episode of Star Trek for that.
I believe it.
Yeah.
So we do have to wrap up. I have some lightning round questions for you, and
okay, here we go.
Let's stay on track. Let's stay on track.
Yeah, let's.
So the question is Kirk or Picard, but here's a caveat.
Yes.
I'm not. You don't have to stick with the classics.
Okay, great.
Because I'm a huge Michael Burnham fan. So
Same.
You just let me know. Is that the winner?
My daughter was Michael Burnham for Halloween this past year.
It's fantastic.
So, and I made her little uniform and everything. Mm-hmm. So, no, I have big love for Michael Burnham, obviously. Mm-hmm. But if we were to stick with classic Trek, it's so hard. But I'm a Sisko person. Captain Ben Sisko is of Deep Space Nine. He's the one. But obviously, like, Kirk was my mom's captain. I grew up really with Picard, so I'm always going to have affection, deep affection and respect for Sir Patrick Stewart.
It's a hard question, isn't it?
It's the worst question.
The most pressing question of the interview.
How dare you?
Okay, well, then back to the Oscar conversation.
Sure.
How about best film, your favorite film of all time?
Oh, of all time?
Yes.
And I have the dumbest answer.
Great.
So so my favorite film is Say Anything. Do you know that film?
I don't.
Yes, it's the boombox.
We have
John
some yeses
Cusack.
over here. Yeah.
It's just, I never ever get tired of watching that film. It's ridiculous, but it's so sweet, and it's just a moment in time for nostalgia's sake. I have a better answer, but my real answer is Say Anything. The better answer is probably Get Out by Jordan Peele.
Okay.
Because I'm also a horror enthusiast.
Okay. Yeah.
So, love it.
Okay. I did have a follow-up to that in case. Do you have a choice for best performance of all time, if it's different than those movies that you listed?
It certainly is. So when we're thinking about the acting awards, I would give my Oscar to Denzel Washington as Malcolm X. And here's why. When I'm thinking about who has done the best acting, it's such a personal, you know, like what's best to me, probably not what's best to you. But for me, I'm looking for total inhabitation. Like, I want you to just be that character. And for many years, granted, I was like, you know, a very young person, but at the time, after that film, whenever somebody would say Malcolm X, the image that I brought to my mind was of Denzel Washington. He was Malcolm X to me. That's not fair to him. And that's also not fair to Malcolm X, the actual Malcolm X. But that's the way that I saw it. So that performance floored me. It just was so perfect for me.
Okay. And well, look, you mentioned being Gen X.
Yes.
And that just like flooded me with all these emotions, feelings, memories.
Yeah.
Let's get your favorite artist of the 1980s.
Oh, well, my favorite artist of any decade in which he was making music is Prince. So, and luckily, that's an individual that also spans into the world of film as well, right? So, I mean, Purple Rain for me, I wasn't allowed to see it. My mom was like, I don't think so on that one. And I was just a little bit too young. No, I was a lot too young. But, and then, of course, we snuck and watched it when I was at a sleepover kind of thing. But no, Prince was a whole genius. And there's no conversation about music that happens, and I don't bring him up.
Yeah, I went down a really deep Prince rabbit hole at one point. You start to learn the level of genius, and you're just blown away at what this individual is capable of.
I know. It's and a talent like that where so I'm aiming to do as a podcaster what he did as a musician, where it's every single hat he wears. So he's like, I'm going to compose it. I'm going to write it. I'm going to edit it. I'm going to play all the instruments. I'm going to be the vocalist. Like, he's just, he does everything. Yeah. I also do everything, but I would like, if there's anyone who would like to help me not be Prince on my podcast, that would be awesome.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Me too.
Beyond J is a production of University Communications at Sacramento State. Our producer is Jonathan Morales. Photography and videography by Bibiana Ortiz. And editing by me, your host, Phillip Altstatt. If you liked this episode, please leave us a review and consider following us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have questions or comments, email us at communications@csus.edu and visit us online at csus.edu/news/beyondj.